Episode, we're going to be talking about 5 players that Joe and I both feel are value picks that you should be targeting in your startup drafts. We're not going to be referencing any particular startup rankings because based on your settings, whether it's the amount of teams that you're in, your scoring settings, or the number of starters that you have, it could vary across the board, especially in IDP leagues with offense. So we're just going to be talking about players that we think are a great value based on where we're seeing them and that you should go target them. So Joe, who is the first guy that we're saying that the people listening out there should target?
Yeah, first guy we're going to talk about here is linebacker Terrel Bernard of the Buffalo Bills. Guy that's slated to be the starting middle linebacker with Matt Milano and Dorian Williams alongside of him there. And the Bills really didn't do much at the linebacker position to change that fact, so that'll still remain the same. And last year, or based off of last season, talking about a guy who played 13 games, 104 total tackles, 1 sack. Also had a forced fumble and a couple interceptions as well. And even in 2023, talking about it, when he did play a full season, he had 143 total tackles. So this guy, when he's gotten the opportunities and able to play the full season, making over 100 tackles, that's really good production out of your linebacker.
Yeah, when we think about linebacker, I think one of the biggest things that Joe and I we've been burned too many times, and as a result, we look into this very closely. And the detail that we're talking about is the contract. And at Front Office Pros, we typically talk about contracts as it is, but when it comes to linebackers, it's especially important. And if you look at it, Terrell Bernard got a 4-year extension from the Bills for $50 million, which is chunk of change, Joe. That's not just nothing. And if you look at that contract, more than likely, Terrell Bernard's probably going to be there for the foreseeable future. I mean, if you look at it, they don't have an out until when he's 29 years old. So you're talking he's under contract for 5 years. At least for the next 3 years, more than likely, he's going to be staying on this roster. So having that sense of security with Bernard is super helpful, especially when it comes to dynasty, because you could draft one of these guys and all of a sudden they just bottom out when it comes to the linebacker position.
Yeah, it is tough. And as you mentioned, it is something we've gotten really burned about, just whether just giving them too long of a contract in our own leagues and guys just not end up playing up to it, or just, guys not producing the same. And then, 2, 3 years after that, they're all done.
Well, not to mention too, like you said, and not to repeat what you were saying, but they didn't bring really any linebacker competition into this defensive room. I mean, Matt Milano took a pay cut because they were saying that I wasn't a part of their conversations, but we could guess that the conversation was you're not able to be on the field. We can't justify the contract that you have with us. I could really see a lot of Dorian Williams on the field, alongside Terrell Bernard, depending on Matt Milano's availability. So I think Bernard is the guy there, although Williams, did quite well when the two of them were injured. But I think Terrell Bernard is a guy who's a little underrated based on where we've seen him in startup draft rankings.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it's especially, just based on his production, even with 13 games, he still had 100 tackles. So with that type of ability and the tackle numbers, I mean, I definitely feel like he's undervalued.
So next guy we're going to be talking about here is a guy who signed in free agency, who was formerly a Tennessee Titan, but he's now a New England Patriot, and that is Harold Landry, now of the Patriots. I think this guy is somewhat forgotten because of, he's just not a household name. And, obviously he tore his ACL back in 2022, 2023 season. But he's basically, over the past 3 years, he's pretty good for almost 10 sacks a year. I mean, he had 9 sacks this past season, 10 and a half the year before that. Had the 1 year where he tore his ACL in camp, was out for the entire year, then had 12 sacks before that. So he's played in the NFL. He's had 7 years of experience. And at the end of the day, he's only 28 years old. He will be 29 on June 5th. So he's going to be getting up there in age, but we know that edge rushers can still perform into their 30s, 31, 32. And now he goes into the New England Patriots defense, and I think that's going to help him. I think being in Mike Vrabel's defense, I think they're going to have a plan for him. And that defense in general, Joe, has gotten a lot better. You got, sounds like Christian Barmore is going to be back. They signed Milton Williams to that contract, huge contract. They've got, Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis on the outside. So they brought Bobby Spillane there in the middle. They brought a lot of talent in there, and they've got Keon White also on the outside. So I think I think New England in general is going to be a lot more feisty than people maybe think based on how they performed last year. But Vrabel is no nonsense, and I think Landry played at Boston College, so I think coming back to his roots, I think it could do well for him.
Yeah, no, I definitely think Landry is going to a really good spot and a spot of opportunity as well. New England, didn't really have a lot of edge rushers that were really producing for them. Anthony Jennings was there, but after they traded away Matthew Judon, I mean, it was really just like a rotational piece. They didn't really have any great options to replace him. So I think Landry definitely will have opportunity there. Like you mentioned, they really upgraded the interior defensive line. Plus, I don't know if you saw the news, Steve, not too long ago, Christian Barmore cleared for activities.
I know. I alluded to that. You must not have been listening.
Yeah, so just another guy as well that they didn't have to add in free agency, but getting him back is also huge.
Well, even look at a guy, in Matt Judon, right? So we're talking about I would think a similar defensive structure. Vrabel was under Bill Belichick, right? They all kind of follow the same, the disciples of Belichick, they kind of follow a similar thing. Look at a guy like Judon, who you mentioned, in his first year with New England, had 15 and a half sacks, and he had that arm issue, and they traded him, and that was it. But I really think Landry is underrated at this point. I don't know why he's as low as he's had as we see him out there.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think just the 1 year he was injured, then he just hasn't quite been the same guy. Also, Tennessee's just been an absolute dumpster fire, and it's really hard to rack up good sack numbers and get to the quarterback and be aggressive on a pass rush when you're constantly playing from behind and out of games. So I think getting with the Patriots, reconnecting there with Vrabel, and the Patriots just being an overall better team, I think that's going to help him alone.
Well, speaking of those Tennessee Titans that are like a wasteland, we are going to be talking about a guy who maybe is being forgotten, and that's defensive tackle Jeffery Simmons on the Tennessee Titans. And he's a guy who, Joe, you and I both are quite fond of. For whatever reason, he's from what we've seen out there, you're looking at a guy who's kind of in that lower tier, within the top 10, and we view him in the higher tier. He's consistently getting around, 5.5 sacks a year. So he has that pass rush upside, which we love to see. But he's even got a guy like Devondre Sweat, who's that big nose tackle type. So it's not like he has someone that kind of eats space, allow him to be able to pass rush. Now losing Landry will hurt. And that defense is not the best, and they are getting better. But just because it's bad, I wouldn't say we should overlook Jeffery Simmons at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I feel like, to like your point, I feel like he is overlooked, and I feel like it's just he does carry some injury concerns, and that shortened some seasons for him. But just from like you said, his pass rush potential that he does have, he can get to the quarterback, get those sacks for you. And he's a big guy. And he plays hard. He also is able to deflect passes at the line of scrimmage. Like, he does a lot to disrupt games. So I feel like from that standpoint, he should be valued higher.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how this defense, fares this next season. I mean, you look at that interior pass rush, you've got Sebastian Joseph Day, Jeffery Simmons, and Devondre Sweat. That's not actually that bad. I think those are actually, pretty decent. But when you look at the outside guys, they got Draymond Jones, which, maybe people forget about that he's on the Titans this upcoming year. He's a tough one. He's kind of a tweener type. Never really, you would know, Joe, as a Broncos fan, really hard to find that right spot for him there because he plays on the edge, but I think he's better on the interior, but he's not big enough to be on the interior. So he's kind of a tough one. And then they drafted Olufemi Oladejo from UCLA. It has a lot of potential there. They got guys like Arden Kay, Jalen Harrell. I mean, this team is, I think the defense is going to be on the field quite a bit. And I think, Cam Ward, maybe he takes the league by storm. I think he's probably going to struggle out of the gate. So as a result, that defense is going to be on the field quite a bit. So Simmons should only continue. I mean, sure, would it be better if he was on a more dominant defense? Yes, but at the end of the day, we still think that it's worth noting his contributions.
I think it'll obviously it could be harder to get some sacks or whatever, but in terms of his tackle numbers, I mean, he should be able to carry a decent floor with being on the field so much.
So next guy we're going to be talking about here is cornerback Nate Hobbs of the Green Bay Packers, who signed there in the offseason, was with the Las Vegas Raiders, now heads over to the Packers. What's interesting about Hobbs is, we didn't really know. I mean, I remember, Joe, when it happened, I messaged you and I was like, what? This is kind of a weird one because they already have Keyshawn Nixon. So we're like, who's going to play the nickel? Because, Hobbs played the nickel while he was with Green Bay. And lo and behold, it seems to indicate that Hobbs is going to be able to stay in that nickel role. And they're going to basically put Keyshawn Nixon on the outside. So that'll be really interesting. And not to mention, I mean, the Packers always, the way they sign guys is a little bit strange. But he signed a 4-year, $48 million contract with the Packers with $16 million guaranteed. So it's not that guaranteed. So if the Packers wanted to move away from him, they totally could. That's what they typically do. So he's going to have to perform. But he's been a great player, Joe. He just has to stay healthy. So I think being able to be in that nickel role with the Packers should be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And like you said, the key for him will be being able to stay on the field. But, I think joining the Packers with, Jair Alexander, despite all the stuff that he had going on last year, seems to be the cornerback one. And like you said, Keyshawn Nixon going to play outside corner, which is interesting in itself just because he's been, a nice IDP find at the nickel cornerback position in his own right. It'll be interesting to see how he does go into the outside. But I think playing opposite of Jair Alexander definitely should help him in terms of still getting the targets there. But for Hobbs, this is the best supporting cast he's been able to play on.
Oh, absolutely. I just, real quick here, we won't stay on this long because it's kind of a tangent, but I just find the way the Packers do contracts very intriguing to me, and I don't really know why players don't put up more of a fight. Because obviously the big thing is all about guaranteed money. So if you look at the contract, though, like he got $16 million in guaranteed money, but it's all signing bonus. So, for those who maybe aren't familiar with the whole contract process, that means that he signs the contract. Here you go. Here's $16 million. Everything else is completely base. So it's all based on performance and how he does. And if they don't like it, they can just cut him, and it doesn't have any dead cap implications. I mean, that shouldn't be true because the signing bonus from a salary cap perspective is prorated equally across the contract. So they will have some sort of dead. But all I'm saying is, like, it's just kind of interesting. I don't know if any other organization does that.
I'm sure they do. I mean, they are definitely one of the.
They do it with all of them, though. I feel
Correct.
like that's a very prominent thing they do.
But
maybe there's like one, few and far between.
But yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, with Hobbs, they got an out next year for $12 million dead cap in 2026, despite it looking like a 4-year deal. I mean, they did similar thing with Josh Jacobs as well. We were both wondering why the heck he signed the deal that he did when probably he could have got more money elsewhere. And we saw all the running backs sign after him and get more money and a better deal. But he ultimately just went with the Packers.
No, and it didn't. I mean, did Xavier McKinney also get that contract as well?
I don't know how. I mean, I assume, but
McKinney,
I don't know how
no.
they
So
structured
McKinney,
it.
no. They gave McKinney, yeah, no, same thing. Yeah, $23 million in signing bonus. So total guaranteed at $23 million, all signing bonus. So
yeah, I mean, it makes
how
sense.
the Packers do it. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it gets spread out, so I guess it makes sense why they do it.
Yeah, I mean, from the player's standpoint, they don't care about the cap. It's just, hey, I signed. Here's $23 million. Thanks. I'll go buy my Porsche, buy a new house, or whatever else they want.
Yeah, and honestly, though, I mean, it also like if they still perform
they do get
well,
cut, then he goes back to free agency.
that's what I was just saying. Then they can continue to make more money. So I think they would like that.
Interesting. All right, so who's our last guy, Joe? We went through defensive end, D tackle, linebacker, corner. Now we got our safety.
Yeah, our final guy is going to be safety Talanoa Hufanga, who is now with the Denver Broncos, coming over from the San Francisco 49ers in free agency. And Talking about contracts here, um, he signed a 3-year, $39 million contract with the Broncos. They do have a potential out after 2026, so they could get out in 2027, but they would incur $4.5 million dead cap there if they went ahead and moved him along. And I'm sure that's mostly just because Hufanga is a guy who's been dealing with some injuries the last couple of years. Since he's been in the league, he's only played one full year season, but he's the guy when he is on the field, though, he makes a big impact. And I'm interested to see how he does with the Broncos. We saw Brandon Jones do really well coming over from the Miami Dolphins last year at the safety position in IDP. Hufanga kind of takes over that strong safety role. Brandon Jones will be going to free safety, more so what PJ Locke was doing last year. So Hufanga seems like he's going to be the guy getting the box snaps. And I think he's got the ability to create just as much, havoc in those plays that Brandon Jones was doing last year for this defense.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll be sent. I think they probably will still send Brandon Jones on blitzes, but
Right.
you're going to see more picks and pass deflections from Hufanga than you will Brandon Jones.
Yeah, that's what I'm just more so interesting to see, like what happens with
How they deploy him.
Brandon Jones and how they could just mix and match these guys. Because obviously, PJ Locke doesn't really give you much versatility. He's not nearly the caliber of players of these guys. But Brandon Jones had such a great year, though. I can't see them just like saying you're gonna just only play free safety and be back there deep.
Well, honestly, too, though, I mean, with Jade Barron being drafted in the first round, I mean, he could be. I mean, he more than likely will be your nickel, but he could be your star where he's playing also in safety type instances as well. So and they had Jaquan McMillan that has maybe he didn't have as good a year last year, but it's pretty good 2 years ago. So Broncos secondary, Broncos defense honestly was already one of the better defenses in the league, and they'll continue to do so. But I guess as long as Hufanga can stay healthy, he was a guy 2 years ago that he was a top 5. In our league, he was a top 5 finish, and many people viewed it from a dynasty perspective as one of the better safeties in the league. Understandably so, his value has dropped since. But he's a guy. Hey, if go ahead and throw a dart throw here. This is value that you could have in your IDP leagues. Now, this might be more of a deeper league pick, right? Because let's say you're a 12-team league. If it's a DB league only, maybe it's a little bit different. But if you're starting 2 safeties like us, this is a good value.
Yeah, it is. And, I've seen some of the rankings we did look at, had Brandon Jones still ranked ahead of Hufanga. And I could see that flip-flopping where Hufanga's got, if he does, continue to get more of those strong safety opportunities, play closer to the ball, that he'd potentially surpass Brandon Jones there. So yeah, I definitely think he's undervalued. And something to mention too, like Brandon Jones, the reason why they got him so cheap was also dealing with some injuries in his own right before coming to the Broncos. But the Broncos training staff, they've always been since Sean Payton's arrived, they're one of the least amount of injured teams in the league. I don't know what Sean Payton and these guys are able to do, but he says, believes in the training camp and giving these guys calluses, and it truly has worked. I mean, they only had, I think, one guy, I think Singleton was the only guy to IR the whole season, and one offensive lineman,